You don't walk down the aisle thinking that one day you'll spend sleepless nights, replaying every inconsistency in your spouse's stories like a detective piecing together a crime. But that became my reality. There were subtle clues at first, things that didn't add up. My wife, Lindsay, always seemed to have a reason to leave the house. Errands that stretched way longer than necessary, last-minute grocery trips for things we didn't even need, sudden plans with friends I'd never heard of. Whenever I questioned it, she never hesitated. Her answers were smooth, logical, almost rehearsed. But after a while, I realized something. The truth isn't just in what someone says. It's in what they refuse to acknowledge. The biggest red flag? Her phone. It was glued to her hand or flipped face down on the table, locked behind a password I wasn't allowed to know. If she ever left it unattended, even for a few seconds, she'd rush to grab it like it held national secrets. She never let me use it, not even to check the weather or make a quick call. And the strangest part? Every message, every call log, even our own conversations, wiped clean every single day. Who does that? What kind of married woman erases every trace of communication like she's hiding from the FBI? I wasn't an idiot. I knew something was off. But knowing and proving are two completely different things. I considered hiring a private investigator, but let's be honest, those guys aren't cheap, and we weren't exactly rolling in money. If I wanted answers, I had to get them myself. So I started paying closer attention, tracking patterns, searching for inconsistencies. Anything to confirm what my gut had been screaming at me. But Lindsay was careful. Felt like trying to catch smoke with my hands. Then, one night, her secret was exposed in the worst way imaginable. A friend sent me a message with a link, telling me I needed to see what he'd just come across. I clicked on it, and my stomach twisted into a knot. It was a 20-second video, grainy but clear enough. My wife, Lindsay, completely naked, tangled up with another man, her moans filling the speakers. At first, I refused to believe it. My brain fought against it, tried to rationalize, to make sense of something that had none. But the reality was staring right at me. Later, I figured out what must have happened. Her secret lover had probably posted it on Snapchat by accident. And just like that, karma decided it was time. Within minutes, the video spread like wildfire, leaking onto gossip sites, forums, even Twitter. Strangers were dissecting it, mocking it, passing it around like a viral meme. But the worst part? Some of my own friends had seen it before I did. I confronted Lindsay immediately. She acted clueless at first, pretending she had no idea what I was talking about. So I pulled up the video, held the screen in front of her face, and waited for her to say something. For a moment, she just stared, wide-eyed, lips trembling. Then, she scoffed and shook her head. "It's Photoshop," she said. "It's fake. Someone is trying to ruin us." I almost laughed. Even with undeniable proof, she still thought she could lie her way out of it. "Photoshop," I repeated, my voice disturbingly calm. "Lindsay, it's a video." She had nothing to say to that, just kept shaking her head, scrambling for an excuse. But there wasn't one that could erase what had already been seen. That was the moment I made my decision. While she was still flailing, trying to salvage the wreckage, I had already contacted a lawyer. I wasted no time filing for divorce, citing infidelity, an affair she had funded with our joint money. She tried to talk to me that night, begged me to listen. But in my mind, she was already a stranger. Whatever love I had left for her had died the second I saw that video. The woman I had married no longer existed. In her place stood someone I didn't recognize. As the divorce process started, one last thought haunted me. The child I had been raising for 2 years. Was he even mine? I wanted to believe Lindsay hadn't deceived me on every level. But after everything that had come to light, I couldn't trust anything anymore. I didn't say a word to her about my suspicions. Instead, I quietly took the steps to find out the truth. I pulled a few strands of Jacob hair from his baby brush, submitted my own sample, and sent it off for testing. Then I waited. The day the results came, I stared at the envelope, unsure if I even wanted to know the answer. My hands were shaking as I opened it. Probability of paternity, 0%. I read it again, and again, My brain refused to process what my eyes were seeing. Had she always known? Did it even matter? The damage was already done. My marriage was beyond dead, and now the one thing I had still held on to, the one piece of this mess that I thought was real, was gone too. By the time we stood in court, I no longer cared what Lindsay had to say. I handed over the DNA test results, along with the leaked video, as evidence of her infidelity. I wanted the court to see the kind of woman I had been married to. When the judge looked at me, there was something in his expression, recognition, maybe understanding. Whether he'd seen cases like mine before or just read the devastation in my face, I don't know. But either way, he finalized the divorce. And with that, I was free. Lindsay, though, she was livid, furious over what she got in the settlement. But I couldn't have cared less. She could have taken everything, and I still wouldn't have stayed. At that point, money, property, assets, none of it mattered. I had lost something far greater, the life I thought I had. So, without another word to her, I walked out of that courtroom and never looked back. After the divorce, I couldn't stay in that city. Everywhere I went, there were reminders of what she'd done. If I stayed, it would eat me alive. I didn't want sympathy. I didn't want people telling me to heal or forgive. What I needed was distance. So I did the only thing that made sense. I walked away. I cut off every single person tied to Lindsay, her friends, her family, even the acquaintances we shared. If they had any connection to her, they'd never hear from me again. I wiped my social media clean, changed my number, and packed only what little I cared about. I left no forwarding address. As far as that version of me was concerned, he no longer existed. Starting over isn't the fresh beginning people romanticize it to be. I moved to a new state, a place where no one knew my name, my past, or the scandal that had shattered my life. At first, I convinced myself that a change of scenery would fix things. But pain doesn't just disappear because you're in a different zip code. It lingers. It settles into the quiet moments, creeping up when you least expect it, reminding you of everything you lost. I tried to outrun it. I kept busy, picked up hobbies I never had time for before. Woodworking, hiking, even learning to cook something other than instant noodles. I forced myself into small talk with neighbors, said yes when invited for a beer, played the role of an average guy living an average life. I even made a few friends. But no matter how much I tried to move forward, a part of me was stuck in the past. Love? That was out of the question. I didn't trust myself anymore. I had given my heart to someone who had crushed it, and I wasn't about to hand the broken pieces to someone else. Every time the thought of dating crossed my mind, an inner voice reminded me how blind I had been before. So, I settled into a life of solitude, a half-life, really. Careful, guarded, never letting anyone get too close. It was lonely, but at least it was safe. And after everything, safe was all I could handle. Then, everything changed when a new neighbor moved in. The first time I saw her, I barely noticed. I had spent years in this neighborhood keeping to myself. I wasn't the type to welcome newcomers with a basket of cookies. But as fate would have it, our paths kept crossing. First at the mailbox, then at the grocery store. Then one evening, she knocked on my door, having locked herself out of her house, asking if she could use my phone. That was the first time I really looked at her, and I saw something in her eyes, something familiar, a sadness I recognized because I had lived with it for years. Her name was Rebecca. She had lost her husband in a car accident a few years back. At first, she didn't share the details, and I didn't push. But as our casual small talk turned into deeper conversations over coffee, I started to learn more. She had endured the kind of pain that never fully fades. And somehow, knowing that made it easier for me to open up too. For the first time since my divorce, I spoke about the betrayal that nearly broke me. The son I thought was mine but wasn't, the life I had abandoned. She didn't judge. She didn't pity me. She just listened. And in her presence, for the first time in years, I felt something like peace. Neither of us had been looking for love, which is probably why it happened so naturally. We spent more time together, watching movies, taking walks, talking about everything and nothing. And after years of believing love was a trap, I started to think that maybe, just maybe, it didn't have to be. When we finally became more than friends, it wasn't dramatic or rushed. It was steady, real. Years passed, and together we built a life. And then, one day, we had a daughter, and she changed everything. The first time I held her, I knew she was my second chance. A chance to be the father I had once wanted to be. With Rebecca and our daughter, I felt something I hadn't in nearly 2 decades. I felt whole. One morning, Rebecca and our daughter were away visiting her family, leaving me alone in the house. I had no plans, just a quiet morning with a cup of coffee and the kind of silence I had come to appreciate. Then came the knock. I wasn't expecting anyone, but I didn't think much of it as I went to open the door. The moment I saw him, I stopped breathing. A young man stood in front of me, maybe 20 years old. His posture was stiff, his face unreadable. But that wasn't what stunned me. It was his features. It was like looking into a mirror of my younger self. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, in a voice that was steady but carried something beneath it, something raw, he said, "Hello, sir. I'm Jacob. I've been looking for you." Jacob? My brain scrambled for an explanation, but there was only one Jacob I had ever known. No, that wasn't possible. Every instinct in me screamed to shut the door. But something, curiosity or maybe something deeper, stopped me. Without a word, I stepped aside and let him in. Moving on autopilot, I poured him a cup of coffee, my mind racing. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, watching me carefully. For nearly 20 years, I had buried my past, pushed it so far away that it felt like another lifetime. And now, in the span of minutes, it had walked right through my front door. And worst of all, it had my face. The silence between us was thick, almost suffocating. I had no idea what to say, so I waited for him to speak first. "I've been looking for you for years," Jacob finally said. His fingers wrapped tightly around the coffee cup, like it was the only thing keeping him steady. He hesitated before continuing. "Every penny I earned, I put into searching for you." I frowned, trying to make sense of his words. "Why?" His eyes met mine, unwavering. "Because you're my father." I let out a short, humorless laugh. "No, I'm not," I said, shaking my head. I had seen the DNA test. I had come to terms with it a long time ago. But Jacob didn't even blink. Instead, he reached into his bag, pulled out a folder, and slid it across the table. "Then read this." Reluctantly, I picked it up and flipped it open. The first page made my stomach drop. It was a medical report from when Jacob was 5 years old. He had needed an emergency blood transfusion. But there had been a problem. His blood type didn't match the man he had called Dad. Confused, the doctors had ordered a DNA test. And the result? That man wasn't his father. I turned the pages, my hands slightly trembling. As Jacob got older, he had done multiple DNA tests trying to understand the truth. Every single one confirmed the same thing. I was his biological father. My vision blurred as I stared at the evidence in front of me. This wasn't possible. Couldn't be possible. "I don't believe this," I muttered, shoving the papers away. My chest felt tight, my thoughts spinning out of control. "You can leave now," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Jacob didn't move. He just looked at me, his expression unreadable. Then, in a quiet but firm voice, he said, "Please don't walk away again. Not like you did 18 years ago." I wanted to tell him to go, to close the door on this and pretend it never happened. But something in his face made me hesitate. "Fine," I said, my voice hollow. "One last test. But if it says you're not mine, I don't want to see you again." Jacob gave a small nod, his face unreadable. "Deal." The next morning, we went to the best lab in the city. I made sure there was no room for doubt. I watched as they took our samples, and the next day the results were ready. I sat in my truck, gripping the envelope. My hands felt clammy as I forced myself to tear it open. The words swam before my eyes for a second before they settled into devastating clarity. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. The paper slipped from my hands. I had abandoned my own son for 18 years. I looked up, my vision swimming, and met Jacob's gaze. He was watching me, waiting, hoping. And for the first time in nearly 2 decades, I felt my walls begin to crumble. I sat across from him, unable to put into words the weight of what I had done. The silence stretched between us, heavy with everything left unsaid. I wanted to speak, to fix this somehow. But where do you even start when you've failed someone in the worst way imaginable? Jacob didn't rush me. He just sat there, waiting. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, but there was a weight behind it. He told me about the man he had grown up calling Dad. That man never married Lindsay, never really claimed Jacob as his own. He had been distant, cold. There was no warmth, no encouragement. Only rules, disappointment, and the constant feeling that Jacob was more of a burden than a son. Hearing it made my stomach twist. For years, I had told myself that walking away had been the right decision, that I had left behind a child who already had a father, a life that didn't need me. But the truth was, I had abandoned my own son and left him to fend for himself in a house that never truly felt like home. Then Jacob said something I wasn't expecting. Lindsay regretted everything. He hesitated, then continued. She regretted pushing you away, regretted the affair, regretted the man she chose over you. As he got older, Lindsay had finally told him the truth. She told him about me, about the mistake with the DNA test, about how I had walked away without knowing the real story. And Jacob had spent years trying to find me, hoping I would still want him. Before I even realized it, my face was wet. I had sworn I wouldn't cry, but the guilt was unbearable. My voice cracked as I finally spoke. I left you when you needed me the most, I said. I failed you. I'm so sorry. But I wasn't just apologizing for leaving. I was apologizing for every birthday I had missed. For every night he had gone to bed wondering why his real father never came looking for him. For every time he had felt unwanted. For a long moment, Jacob said nothing. Then, finally, he exhaled and gave me a small nod. I was angry for a long time, he admitted. But I didn't come here just to be angry. I came here because I needed my father. He hadn't spent years searching just to confront a ghost from his past. He had come looking for the father he had never truly had. And for the first time in 18 years, I realized I still had a chance to be that man. Making up for 18 years wouldn't happen overnight. But there was one thing I knew for sure. I wasn't going to waste another second. Jacob needed to know that he wasn't alone anymore, that he had a place in my life, and more importantly, a place in my family. The first step? Introducing him to his half-sister. She had grown up surrounded by the kind of love and security that he had been denied. And I knew that meeting her would be emotional for both of them. When they finally stood face to face, there were no awkward introductions, no hesitation, just a hug. A simple, silent embrace that said welcome. Then came my wife, Jacob's stepmother. She had always known about my past, understood the weight of the pain I carried. But meeting Jacob made it real. She greeted him with kindness, warmth, and the quiet understanding of someone who had experienced both loss and healing. As the days turned into weeks, we slowly started to build something new. We weren't a perfect family, and we never would be. The years we had lost could never be rewritten. But they also didn't have to define us. What mattered was the future. And for the first time in a long time, I had hope that we could create one together. I couldn't change the past. I couldn't give Jacob the childhood he had deserved. But I could give him something else, something just as important. A father who would never walk away again. Looking back, I realize how easy it is to let pain dictate your choices. When my wife betrayed me, I didn't just leave her. I left everything. I wanted nothing to do with the mess she had created, so I ran from it all. At the time, it felt like survival. I thought disappearing would help me heal, that severing every tie would erase the pain. But pain doesn't work that way. For 18 years, I convinced myself I had done the right thing. After all, the DNA test had given me proof that the boy I had been raising wasn't mine. And yet, I was wrong. I made a choice based on what I thought was the truth. But the truth had layers I never uncovered. The DNA test I took back then told me one thing. But life has a cruel way of proving that even proof can be flawed. Because of that one mistake, I lost nearly 2 decades with my real son. I missed his childhood, his birthdays, his struggles, his joys. I missed it all. And the worst part? I can't get that time back. I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you as a warning. Pain blinds us. When we're hurt, all we want to do is run. To escape, to forget, to start fresh somewhere else. But in trying to protect ourselves, we sometimes create bigger wounds. Wounds that don't just hurt us, but the people who love us. The people who need us. If I had stayed, if I had dug deeper instead of letting my emotions drive me away, I could have known the truth sooner. I wouldn't have left my son to grow up thinking I had abandoned him. So if there's one thing you take from my story, let it be this. Always seek the full truth before making life-altering decisions. Don't react out of anger, hurt, or betrayal. Look at everything. Ask questions. Verify even when you think you already have the answers. Because sometimes what we believe to be true is only part of the story. Now, I have a second chance. It won't erase the past, but it gives me a future with my son. And this time, I won't let anything take that away. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and like.